When asked what research topic I was interested in, I said I would choose to examine the situation in which displaced people and refugees are facing today. A person transitioning away from their homeland to different areas is a topic that hits close to home for me. I've heard of countless stories from relatives of the hardships that they have endured during their transition into a better place. This is nothing new though. Throughout history, people have been displaced for various reasons, such as war, man-made and natural disasters, economics, and political motives. Many of these displaced people have difficult time finding habitable transitional shelters, both short-term, long-term, and in between. They also face hardships transitioning back to their homeland for reasons such as uninhabitable structures, non-functional cities, and other socio-economical reasons. The situation of displaced people has become one of the biggest humanitarian challenges in the world today. According to the Office of the United Nations High Commissioners for Refugees, in the last decade, we have seen a substantial amount of displaced people. Most of the people displaced in the last decade could be linked to either war or political instability in their homelands. In 2000, there was approximately 35 million displaced people, and today there is around 60 million. That number has nearly doubled. This has caused an influx of refugees seeking shelter in host countries and non-host countries. The design and dialogic urgency of the refugee crisis today may be one of the biggest challenges architects and urban designers may face. Researching this topic, I looked into two case studies in particular by Normal Architecture Office, architect Sarjadon Jovanovic Wes. The first was a handball stadium in Novi Sad. Due to the political instability in Serbia during the 90s, the handball stadium was abandoned and began to decay. People transitioning back to their homelands will many times find this situation. West shows us that buildings can be repurposed and reused. He redesigned the structure so that it would not only become a place where the youth can play handball, but also designed it for electronic media. To transition people sustainably back to their homelands, we must reuse the existing structures. The second building I looked at, which was also designed by Wes, was a housing project for the elderly in a post-socialist town. The aging population is growing faster than the normal pace, and today, urban cities are also growing faster than a normal pace. As urban cities become filled with a younger population, this leaves the elderly looking for a new sense of place where they can belong. West designs a new permanent shelter where the elderly can belong with the use of new and innovative materials. People transitioning into different areas have a big impact on the environment. So the question arises, how can we help people transition sustainably with the least impact on the environment? This moves us on to poster 2, methods. So for us to sustainably design camps and places for refugees and displaced people, we must first find out what are the environmental impacts of the people transitioning from their homeland and settling into temporary shelters or permanent camps. The approach that needs to be taken into researching the answers to this question is a combined research methodology. Reason being that there are so many variables in different areas that can be learned from. The 3 research methods that I choose to look into were quantitative, qualitative, and historical research. As you can see from this poster, the majority of my research method will be examining the history of camps and shelters. By looking at precedent and case studies, we can learn different methodologies used, what worked and what did not. Just as West did in his design for the elderly, he looked at places such as Brazil, Florida, and New York. I would also study the duration of time spent in camps, transitioning, or in shelters. This will give us an insight on how long people are spending transitioning in and out of camps for better design judgment. Also, I would listen to narratives because this is extremely important. This will help the designer relive of what was going on in these camps or shelters during that time. And lastly, the cultural aspect. This is extremely important because people have different customs. Sometimes these customs may have negative impacts on the environment, so it is important to examine this. Second exploration method would be the use of quantitative research. Here we will investigate statistics and how they have impacted the environment. Third, I would look at the use of qualitative research method. By looking at the process in which architectural planners and designers are using today. Looking at the settings where this takes place and different phenomena that occur when people are transitioning into shelters. Therefore, it is clear why a mixed research methodology would work best. This moves me on to poster 3, Purpose. Here, I look into the 3 components of architectural context. The first component I look at is site. Today, the plight of displaced people is becoming more and more difficult. Since the numbers keep rising and the continuous influx of people onto foreign lands has made this an international issue. No longer are refugees concentrated in certain areas. Refugees and displaced people are now moving around the world. As you can see through this diagram, it shows a global flow of refugees isn't contained or constrained in certain areas no longer. Hence, sites and settlements cannot always be chosen because in most cases these are emergency situations where timing does not allow for things such as site suitability studies. Some site contexts that I looked over were water supply, preservation, sanitation, accessibility, climatic conditions, existing roads and walkways, vegetation, etc. I then categorized them in 5 different categories: people, environmental, cultural, economy, and safety. The second context that I looked at was program. Again, here I look at different program contexts such as quality, budget, operating costs, requirements, and their influences on people, environment, cultural, economy, and safety. Furthermore, I also looked at how do we effectively create environmentally sustainable camps and shelters. Here I looked at 6 different elements and got recommendations from the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees and the United States Agency for International Development. The first element I looked at was a minimum living space per person, which is 37 square feet per person. I also looked at the number of toilets, and the recommendations I found was 1 for every 20 people, and that has to be at least 20 feet away from any living shelter. It also has to be no more than 165 feet away from any shelter. The third element I looked at was water, where the recommendation is that there is a water point no more than 330 feet away from any shelter. The shelter has to provide at least 15 to 20 liters per day per person, and 20 to 30 liters per person for medical patients. For feeding areas, at least 40 to 60 liters. Fourth, I look at fire breaks, and a 165-foot fire break area with no building is recommended for every 1,000 feet. Fifth, I looked at multi-family shelter, which should hold no more than 35 people. Lastly, a minimum of 860 square feet of hospital space is required for every 4,000 people. The last component I looked into was the social context. This is important because camps need to provide its inhabitants with not only their basic needs, but also their cultural and social needs. The goal here is to make the user feel as comfortable as possible, just like how they were living from the area and where they transitioned from. Most have already been through tragic events and or emotional events that led them to be in the situation that they are in now. That is why designers, we also have to make sure that the users of these camps and shelters are met with their social welfare needs. In terms of social context, it is important to review central community areas, religious centers, social service centers, security, leadership, and etc. This here finalizes my project. Thank you for watching.